Um, and this week we are doing the second part, I guess, of our intro or pilot for the podcast that we are setting up and moving this into a podcast series, so you can listen to it going on a drive to work or whatever it is. So thank you for joining us. And this week I'm interviewing James on his story with faith and with spirituality. So James, where did it all start for you?
I suppose for me, I would say it all started in 2009 when I had what I consider like a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening, which was like at the time I wouldn't have considered myself, strictly speaking, a Christian. I'd been brought up in a Christian home and going to church on Sundays and stuff. But I was 23 at the time, so I'd kind of drifted away from that through university and subsequently, when I wasn't living with my family and spending time with them, I wouldn't go to church. It wasn't part of my day-to-day or weekly life. So I kind of like in my head, I kind of believed that there was a God, or God existed, but God did his own thing and was away. And I'm very much sort of gesturing at the sky and sort of like upwards. And I did my own thing, and I kind of like, there was a hope in me that, it didn't take too much of a close interest, because some of the stuff I did, I was a bit ashamed about, and I didn't really think were particularly godly or whatever, or what a Christian should do, if you like, or a good Christian, in inverted commas, whatever that is. So in 2009, I was living with my older sister, and she is a Christian, and she used to invite me along to a house group that she ran at our house every week. Which I'd politely refuse every time, and I'd go and hang out with a friend of mine, where we would, just do our own thing, and it wasn't particularly sort of spiritual in any way. We were just like, hanging out and sort of making myself scarce, really, at the time. And this one evening, I remember it really clearly because it's had such an impact. It was the 17th of November in 2009, which was a Tuesday. Jenny, my older sister, said, do you want to join us for food? Obviously, we've got house group. You don't have to come along, but you can come along for food beforehand if you like. And far be it for me to pass up a free meal. I said yes. And she
That's how
said,
Christians always get you, James.
Exactly. Yeah. The way to the heart is through the stomach. We all know that, right? So I stuck around food, and her friend Mackie came along as well, and so it's just the three of us, and we were just chatting. And he'd asked me a bit about my life and that sort of stuff, and I talked to him a bit. I was quite depressed at the time. I was quite sort of low. Was working in a job where had a lot of people who I saw with no way out of their lives, or no sort of hope. There was quite a lot of despair. People who I was working with either struggled with substance misuse or alcohol dependence and things like that, or had long-term health issues of the kind which meant they precluded them from holding down work and having sort of like a freedom over their finances and over their lives, and sort of there was a real sense of despair with a lot of the people who I met, and I've really experienced that in a big way, empathizing with their situations and just thinking, what is the solution here? How do we help? How can anybody help? And one of my managers saying at the time, James, you're a very magic wand type of person. You want there to be one solution, one sort of like one size fits all, like panacea for everybody, and didn't think much of it at the time. This is a very roundabout way for me to get into the crux of the story.
That's quite all right, James. That's quite all right.
I don't know if you're familiar with my style.
So you're 23. You're living with your sister.
Yeah.
You've been invited to stick around for this for dinner, where a friend is there, and he's asking about your story, your life.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then outside of that, you're in a place of feeling quite depressed or despairing, taking on this sense from those you're working with and trying to help.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it kind of like tapped into, I suppose, a deeper part of myself and a deeper part of my psyche, where ever since I was very, very little, I'd always sort of like questioned, why am I here? You know, this whole sense of when we're born as us, and there's a sense of self and all of this, but I didn't choose it. And where did I come from? And what was I before that? And did I exist? But so like all of these weird existential things that I'm sure have existential answers and so on. But this sense of like unknowing and unknown and I suppose. You could describe it, or certainly in a Christian circle, you might describe it as spiritual homelessness or spiritual abandonment, that type of questioning. Anyway, talking to this friend of mine, who's now a friend of mine, about where I was, and eventually coming around to the point where I asked him what he did. And subsequently, he told me what he said. I just try to love people, love God, and love people, or something along those lines. I don't remember, because whatever it was he said, I got this real sudden and very, very distinct sense of something different inside me. And there's this like kind of bubbling up from like my stomach upwards into my chest, into my sort of thorax, and just this like sense of opening, of lifting, of growing. And what I now know is it was joy. It was a real sense of joy, and a sense of being, and a sense of belonging, and a sense of being loved, which I'd never experienced that before. And don't get me wrong, my upbringing had been all right. I'm not from a particularly traumatic childhood or anything like that. Nothing that you could point your finger on and go, wow, that was terrible. It was it was okay, and my parents loved me, my sisters loved me, and I loved them, as far as I knew. And then this sense here was so different from anything I'd experienced before, and this sort of ecstatic feeling, and then this real sense that there was another person sat to my left at the table, and that they were just a being of complete light, that they were real, and the only thing I was saying was, oh, you're real and you're here. Was the only sort of, I don't know if I said that aloud or it was just sort of in my head, but just this real benevolence and love that I sensed from this figure. And so I spent like the rest of that evening, I attended that house group, obviously, and my first one ever. And there was only one other person who came along, apart from this chap Mackie and my older sister. And I just spent the evening kind of in tears, in laughter, in joy, in real sort of like recognition that the way I was living and what I was doing with my life wasn't particularly good for me or for anybody else, and that I could change, and I had that suddenly there was this reason and direction and purpose and sense of belonging and sense of being loved. All the things I suppose that I've been missing up until that point.
And it sounds a real contrast to that sense of, you called it spiritual abandonment. This sense of joy, of being loved, of this presence right there next to you. Feels so different, so fuller.
Exactly, and more than that, like there was the physical sensation is something that I always kind of remember really really distinctly, and I've had it since. I had it subsequently, not quite so intensely and not so quite so frequently as I did when I first sort of experienced God in that way, and you know, for me that was God, you know, that I was experiencing. It was a being outside of myself, an entity outside of myself that wasn't me, that wasn't another person, was other, and in that kind of sort of literal sense, holy, holy being other, like different, not the same as, and yeah, and that physical sensation of joy bubbling and that like upwelling within me was so profound and so undeniable that you know I couldn't carry on essentially the way I was living, and just this sense that things were all going to be okay. I also remember like distinctly over the next sort of few months or so, just really praying and every time, every night I would lie in bed awake and just praying to God and like experiencing this same sensation and this sense of being loved and sense of belonging and sense of being held, and I just wanted everybody else to feel that, everybody else to experience that, and this realization when I over those months when I went to church that that not everybody in church knew what I was talking about or knew what I was experiencing, and this sense like of, oh, am I mad? Is this like, have I had a psychotic break or something? I didn't know the term at the time, but like was what was happening to me? And if so, then you know, again, everybody needs to experience this. And gradually, like seeing that the person, this guy Mackie, knew what I was talking about. There were a few other people in the church who had similar sorts of experiences or understood and from where what I was saying, and then and experiencing, and when I was talking to people, and then. And this talk between us about intimacy with God and intimacy in prayer and in the way we worshipped and spoke to God and whatnot. And where was I going with that? So I suppose that's where it all started, and that's where it, like, this real physical, spiritual change that happened, and this sense that there was this whole world that I'd missed, and just walking around in the city that I live in and seeing everything and everything looked beautiful. Nature looked more vibrant and alive, and there was this realization that there was an intricacy to it, and there was an intricacy to people, and people were walking around in this cloud, not realizing that how beautiful they were, not realizing how special and wonderful and precious they were. And we wanted to tell everybody, you know, this sort of like, and this sadness that I couldn't. That, you know, whenever I did try to tell people, you get this kind of hesitant, oh dear, this is a crazy talking to me. You know, what's going on? This person's too intense. This conversation is, you know, it sounds like madness, and it does sound like madness. It does sound because it's not something you can see or touch or anything like that. There is it is other, isn't it? It is different. So there was all of that going on. This sense that I didn't really understand my place or purpose, but knew that there was something more, there was something real, and that and my life was changing from here on. It was never going to be the same. And about maybe 3 months later, I had an experience where, and it didn't shock me because, like, I was so. Because this had been such a dramatic difference from my life before, of God giving me a vision or a dream. I feel like it was a vision or a dream of what He would like me to do in Plymouth, and he said to me, James, I want you to build my house in Plymouth. My instant response was, yeah, of course, and not knowing to what he meant, and then not foolishly not asking, just agreeing, but yeah, why not? And so I've still got that. That's still sort of like part of my story now, although it has changed and developed and transformed as my life's gone on.
So before we go on to the change, I feel like we're about to go there. Just
that's
like it sounds like a really. I mean, your face is all lit up.
Yeah,
like the joy is really like a really amazing time of, and a really, I was like this, and now I'm like this at that point. And so like a real amazingness, and also, I was trying to think of the word. It was not quite frustration, almost. I want to say almost a woundedness that others misunderstand, and the sadness of that. That there's
and not being able to share it, and not being able to show it. You wanting to share this feeling and this experience, but there's no tangible way to do that. There's no sort of like giving it to somebody. I had maybe one experience of that where a guy asked me for change in the street, and I said I haven't got it, but I can pray for you. And he said, yeah, sure. Which again, not a common a response, but does happen from time to time. I prayed for him, and he got something that of this experience. He's like, I don't even need that money anymore. And like we talked about it, we're really excited afterwards. And so in that moment, and like, it really changed his life. And then since then, just seeing how like that, like it made an impact for him there and then, but didn't have a lasting effect or a lasting change. And then me questioning now, does that matter? Does that? And I don't know, that there's a lot. That's kind of me jumping to the very end question. So I'll wait with that.
Stay in order, James.
Yeah. Exactly.
I should be able to trust you to stay in order, not float about anywhere.
Yeah, right.
So let's go on. So how have you noticed your faith or that spirituality change or move since then?
So that's a really, really good question, and it's been very, very gradual, but it has changed. It has moved since then. So there was in me at that time, there was such a certainty and such a zeal and this real sense that this is the only way, like, no, there can't be any other way that people can come to God except for like having this type of experience, having this type of like real awakening. And then I think partly because of my age, being in early 20s, there's something there's always been like a kind of I've always had this kind of arrogance, this kind of like pride of thinking, oh well, kind of I know best. I know a bit more than other people, and it bothers me now that sort of that thought process. I'm like, oh, foolish and arrogant and not. I'm wrong as well, because you when you listen to other people and you hear them and you hear and you kind of hear between the lines almost, you realize, oh, hang on, there is more to that. There is more to what they're saying. There is more, and certainly from the counselling side of things, you realize, oh, okay, all I've realized by knowing as much as I do is that I know very, very little. The more I sort of understand what I know, the more I realize it is less than a snowflake in a blizzard, So the way it changed was sort of through. I started attending church. I started to sort of like go along to house groups regularly. doing things within the church, helping with soup runs, and there's a homeless cafe. I say a homeless cafe, a cafe that's sort of like an open door cafe that was for everybody and anybody, particularly frequented by people who are struggling with homelessness and or substance misuse, and continued to spend time with this guy who'd been there at this experience that I had, this sort of like awakening. And we were talking a bit about, okay, so we want to share this joy and this love that we've got with people who have nothing, who really are at the end of themselves, people who are struggling with homelessness, with drug and alcohol addictions, with various other mental health issues, and all of these things that are co-morbid with one another. And so we started to take people in. I moved into a house with him that was connected to the church, and we would look after people for a day or two, or for a time, or just have people in for meals. We were building relationships with a lot of these people. And then this kind of division I noticed from quite early on, and I knew it was there, between the way we were doing things and there were other people as well in the church who were moving in that direction, and that sort of like real drive to help and to love and to share God's love. And I'd seen that reflected in the Bible and what I'd read. I kind of immersed myself in the Bible, started from page 1 and just carried on reading, which, you know, it's not the recommended method to read the Bible, but I again, in my pride and my arrogance, knew better. But read huge swathes.
You might all slog at times. That way.
Real old slog, yeah. You know, I'm going to plough through Deuteronomy, every single ruddy genealogy. And I'm sure, had I understood Hebrew, they would have meant a huge amount. And having read around it and understood later on, like, oh wow, that's beautiful, that's amazing. And having this real love for the Bible and real love for people, and wanting to share that love, and it was real, like that sort of like wanting to share that joy and that love, and that life can be different. It doesn't have to be the way it is. And noticing how that diverged and was different from how, like, church or big church, as I kind of looked at it then, was. And there was this real divide, and it became more and more apparent that the way we were doing things and the way the church was we were kind of like a sideline to what church was, which seemed to be about Sundays, singing songs and having a sermon, and the sermon being really big and powerful and stirring and all this sort of stuff, and which occasionally, you know, I get, and occasionally I just wouldn't. And and as things went on, I kind of like didn't really think much of it. I just thought, you know, the main thing that where you know, where the love is where you're with people. You know, it's in the everyday. It's when you interact with people, whether that's on the long term or the short term. If you're just interacting for a moment with somebody, or interacting with like somebody you live with, that's where that's the importance. That's the vital part. Like, Sundays are a bit of an add-on for me, and it didn't matter so much about Sundays. Anyway, life went on. Eventually, one of the other people in the church was like, let's start a house for people who don't have a house. Let's start a place where we can look after people and work with people who need a family, need a home, a family for people who don't have a family. And so we started to do that. My friend Mackie moved away. He went to Hong Kong to do similar sort of stuff, and various other places. And me and this lady Fiona started a house, initially just 1 or 2 people, and then it gradually grew and grew. And that was my life for about 5 years, living in that house, which was called the Greenhouse. And we had a host of people come through, some people helping, some people being helped, and some people a little bit of both, you know. And the idea was that if you were living there to support it, you lived there, you had a part-time work or something, and the rest of your time was there as sort of like brothers and sisters, and living together, and working together, eating together, praying together, and supporting one another. And it's still now, like I think about it and I'm like, yeah, it's such a wonderful idea, such a beautiful vision and concept, and certainly tapped into that vision that I'd had early doors. But with it, as the years went by, we'd get fewer and fewer people who were helping, and more people who were needing the help and needing more time and love, and that took its toll on me, being one of the only people living there as the support, as in-house support. I took quite a big financial hit doing it. Was working part-time, but very, very few hours, so I wasn't quite making ends meet for myself, and or for my own finances. A lot of the people who we helped would have relapses with drugs or alcohol, or with mental health and all sorts of stuff, and it could feel really really futile at times, and really, really tough. But we were in it together, you know, and there was this real sense of like, it's okay, you know, no matter what, we will accept people back, no matter what. We kept tweaking it, kept trying to work out what was the best way, you know. Is it better to say no to people and have firm boundaries, or is it better to, where people have always had no, to say yes to them, you know? And there was this real sort of like difficult conversations we're having amongst ourselves, and working out how to do things, until one day it just got too much for me, and I can't remember what exactly it was, but we used to have one person who was maybe like neuroatypical, so might have had autism, and had learning difficulties of some kind, but had quite a manipulative way of approaching people, and certainly there was a relationship between me and him where he was very attached to me, and I couldn't kind of put in boundaries then, like, you know, it was really challenging, and as a result, that kind of really, I found that relationship particularly very draining, and other relationships also draining, and the expectation on me really high, and I crumpled under it. This was after we finished our counselling course, so maybe the year after, and I deferred my dissertation, my research project, because of the things that I was going through, and basically I broke down. I left the house. I went and stayed with a couple of friends for a couple of weeks. Said to Fiona, who's the lady who was running it, who had kind of had oversight on it, I just couldn't do it anymore, and I couldn't articulate it even. You know, it was sort of like an emotional and spiritual brokenness that I was experiencing, and it kind of went. I realized that that's like a very much not where my spirituality is going, but it gives kind of a bit of background to what was going on spiritually as well. So with the church that I was attending, there were a couple of friends of mine who'd got engaged, and they were both women, and they got engaged to each other, and that was a real problem for a lot of the members of the church, a lot of the leadership of the church, but who disagreed with it and saw it going against the teachings in the Bible and against certain passages in the Bible, and believed it was wholly wrong. And for me, it didn't clash with my view of the Bible. It didn't clash with my view of God at all. It didn't clash with my view of them. You know, I saw their love as right, as good, as the way that they loved one another, only brought out the best in each other, and brought out the best in each other for others as well as for themselves. And so I was like, well, no, obviously it's, you know, all good things come from God, and this was a good thing. So as a result, the whole church went through this period of, it was euphemistically termed the journey, which is still a word I struggle with now. And we went through a series of conversations and meetings and discussions where we really challenged one another and tore apart this topic of being LGBTQ and Christian and how they clashed or didn't clash, or how they meshed or didn't mesh. And we had one of our church pastors who was for it, and one of our church pastors who was against it. And unfortunately, they were both friends, and they had been friends from before they came to the church. And this really put a rift between their friendship, and I really think it put a rift there. And I don't know if that's recovered. I'm not in touch with either of them any longer, so I don't know. But it certainly put a rift through the entire church, and the church essentially went through a big breaking, a big disintegrating process over the course of maybe a year and a half. It's quite a damaging time for people.
So you're in a church that's disintegrating.
Yeah.
And you were, in a sense, you said you were broken. Like
yes.
you were disintegrating.
Yeah, that's it.
In a sense. And it sounds like even right at the start, there were fractures or splits where you saw the incongruence between what you were feeling and experiencing and what this big church seemed all about. And and all these sorts of fractures, it felt like everything was fracturing and splitting and
it was
shattering.
Like those fractures were there already, and this was just them like kind of being given room to move. Sorry, Karen.
Sorry, I shouldn't jump in, should I? But I'm just like, what's going through my head is that idea of spiritual home.
Yeah.
And how like it, that build my house and that home with that you built, and then losing that again in the church disintegrating, this home slipping away. It feels almost like you're back where you were.
Yeah, very much. And it's funny, it's like, it's sort of stirring me up at the moment, just thinking about it. Like that's a really good reflection, Tom, because that's I think exactly what it was, and it's not something I thought about or even thought about until now. So yeah, there was very much like a reflection in the church of what was happening for me at home, and what was happening for me maybe spiritually as well, because there was this sense of maybe I've got it wrong, and maybe I wasn't what I experienced, and there was this real doubting and real sort of and I believed at the time, and I still believe now that I clung on to God through all of this, and that I was like, well, God's right, but I really struggled to pray, I really struggled to worship, I really struggled to do anything that felt that felt like it was part like Christian in some ways, and there were some things that I really felt okay with, but most of it I really didn't. And so I as I say, moved out of this house, started a new job, doing ironically still working in substance misuse sector in a rehab, but able to still like share love with people there and share hope with people there. But it was a real broken love and a real broken hope, and not one that necessarily I fully believed in any longer, or there were cracks throughout it. And so that was what, 2018, maybe 2017, 2018 that happened. And it's been a gradual process since then until now, and I'm in a much more stable place now than I was then. At the time, you could have knocked me over with a feather if you tried, and there was what I realised at the time, and even now, that and the unpicking of it all was as I kind of metaphorically combed through the wreckage of all that had happened through life and church and spirituality and so on, that there were bits that were real and that I loved, and obviously you saw that when I was talking about where it all started. You know, that joy is still there, that love is still there, and that and I know that God is real, and that He's for me, that He loves me, and I say He, knowing that in my heart I don't believe that God is gendered. I believe that God encompasses all gender and all the spectrum of gender, and that of course He understands each one of us on an individual, on a personal, intimate level, because He understood me in that way, and I knew that I was understood in that way. And so how could God not understand absolutely every single one of us? God's all powerful. God's way bigger than anything we could ever understand. But I'm getting ahead of myself again, unsurprisingly. So through all of this wreckage, I'm so kind of picking up bits. Okay, do I believe this still? Do I believe that still? What about this? What about that? And I've talked to you before about the process of deconstruction. Mine was quite cataclysmic, but there are all of these pieces, much like a Lego set that has been like taken apart to its components, and I'm just left here in a pile of rubble, going, okay, what now? But there's also a joy to it. There's a peace to it as well, knowing that that all of those pieces, in amongst that, there is real good, and that I don't necessarily need to go searching to find it, because it's still there and it's still real, and it's here. It's with me. And so, like, I suppose where it's brought me to, and it's moved, is that I believe that God is for us and with us, and loves us unconditionally and without hindrance. I believe that almost any form of organized religion or institution will get it wrong. And I don't say that you know, like, I'm not trying to denounce all religion or denounce all faith structures or institutions, but I don't believe that we can separate our own desire for power or our own desires from the things that we do, and those things are kind of trying to fulfill a need with us. And there's this, you know, I've got the experience of going through working with people who are struggling with drugs and alcohol and various other addictions and stuff like that. And this sense in me of, well, are we not all addicted in some form to some things? And do we not all seek in some way to get those needs, in those deep-seated needs in us, fulfilled? And sometimes the ways we seek that are unhealthy and not very helpful to us or to those around us, with whatever we choose. So that it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag, as always.
I got this image of you know, when they demolish buildings, and like this sort of you were saying about Lego, but in my head I was thinking kind of, you know, when they just take out a layer and then the whole building just collapses, or take out the foundations. And it was like that happened with the house, and then that happened with the church, and then that moment afterwards when it all settles and there's quiet again. And that I guess that was my feeling then, of just the quietness of sitting amongst the rubble, and there being peace that everything that was good is in this rubble,
Yeah, that's
and
it.
it's not. It's almost a task of taking out the stuff that is the rubbish. Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking that that real the link to addiction seemed really interesting for your story, and how faith can be addictive, or can be like an addiction, or church, or things that that sounds like a really powerful way of a powerful lens to look at things, as well as the home metaphor, and as well as the kind of fragmenting metaphor, and integrating metaphors as well.
Yeah, so they're all sort of linked to one another, and there's certainly like with anonymous groups like AA and so on. There are there's a set, like the first step is to recognize that you're powerless, and that you're inherently not able to do anything in your own power, and that you need to turn your self over, surrender yourself to a higher being. So they've all got within them, within the structure of it, there is this sense of turning yourself over to a higher being, this surrender to God, essentially. Or for want of a better word, because people struggle with that, and I get that people struggle with it. The word God, the term God, and that within that, I see, I've met people who are so fanatical and zealous about their anonymous groups, and sticking to that. That you can see, that there's like, it's almost like an addiction. It's almost, and I would never use those terms to somebody who's in that, because I'm sure it would be very, very offensive. But there's also this sense of the term "once an addict, always an addict," and I don't. For me, like, I've always struggled with these sorts of things, because I think it's always been person first. We are all always people first before we are anything else. We are a human. We are a being. We are when you start there, it really changes things. It really, really changes how you look at somebody, and how you understand, and how you can love them as well. Whereas if you start with addict, addict comes from the Latin for slave, and it's really fascinating looking at the Bible, and how the Bible deals with slavery and enslaved people, and the Ten Commandments. When you think about how the Ten Commandments are written to a people who have just been released from slavery, so their own self-worth and their self-esteem is at rock bottom, and then suddenly they're told to love their neighbor, to love God, to put each other first, to not be selfish, to not think of only themselves, or to see themselves as lesser. There's a lot to it, and then to see people who coming through substance misuse and alcohol misuse and so on, to see them believe that they're still that person when they're no longer dependent on it, or they are dependent on it, but they have to do these rituals to stop themselves from using it, if you like. So that's another little tangent.
But it's all wrapped up in this idea of are we people who are loved, or are we something else? Are we addicts, or slaves, or people who can be discarded, or and all these names we put onto people, that
the labels,
that seem like are we depressed? Are we
this person is depressed, and it's like, well, no, it's a person who's suffering from depression at the moment. And when you start with people first, it really changes. And what really struck me is when we were doing the counselling training, and this is why systemic therapy really hit home for me, was that there's a whole branch of systemic therapy all about labour, all about language, all about, and it on the surface it seems super wishy-washy, and you're like, really, come on. But then you delve into it and you think, no, language really informs our belief. It really informs, like when you start to realize, oh, hang on, but words have power. Words are powerful. And when you look at the Bible again and go back to the part in 1 John where it talks about the word and the word becoming flesh and the word dwelling with us, and you think, well, the word is God and the word was God, and all of that, and you think, whoa, hang on, it tells us something, doesn't it, that the words are powerful. We are a species that are dependent on language. It's one of our huge powers, and it's one of our huge failings. We are so dependent on our ability to communicate with one another, and it's flawed and it's fallible, and it's totally, and that's where like the majority of our humor comes from, and the majority of our wars come from. But it's still good, and it's because it's powerful that is true, that's the case. So it's fascinating. It's sort of,
yeah, no,
it's been a rocky road.
Yeah, it sounds like, and I'm kind of in my head, I'm thinking, where you were before with this. You said your manager noticed that you wanted something magical.
Yes,
the magic wand.
Magic wand.
And then like the power of words, and also powerlessness being this first step. And these all seem kind of interwoven parts of your journey, of kind of, the power of the wand to also do harm, maybe, and or to kind of turn back on us, and the 100%. The power of words to turn back on us, and yet, and also there maybe being some power in that's for good or for building up again. They all seem part of this strand as well. So to land with, what would you really like us to know about your faith?
I think where I've come to, and I think that it was always growing in amongst those cracks, and this will become relevant in amongst those cracks, and that divergence that I experienced early on, and like the cracks that I noticed in amongst the church, which then subsequently led to the disintegration or the demolition of that edifice, in both in my head, physically and sort of spiritually speaking, were the seeds and the growth of what I now see as my faith as being, and we talked about it before, about the trees, and underneath all of that rubble, and beneath it all, beneath the foundations, there's good soil, and there's real earth, and there's real foundation. And what comes from that is not a man-made structure, not a human construct, not an institute, but natural organic growth of trees, of vines, of plants, of things that come out of the soil and grow and give life where they grow. They bring oxygen, they give shade in the sun. There's a sense that there'd be water nearby, that they give shelter for animals to live, and for birds to roost. And that's where my faith has come to, is that each one of us has within us the seeds, and has within us the life-giving ability of God, and that God has planted in us, and that can grow, and we've got to give space. And the only way we can give space is for the ground to be cleared, for there to be nothing in the way, no building there, no sort of like preconception, no sort of I know better, I'm right, or like, it's not, there's not space for this type of person or that type of person, or these people are allowed but these aren't. There's no space for this compartmentalization. there has to be, for wild growth to come back, for the trees to resurface, we have to clear back to soil to bear, and that can be painful. And I guess what I would want people to know is that I have a faith. My faith now is one of, I believe that everybody's got it. Everybody, it's there and it's in everybody, dormant or otherwise. I'm no longer either you're in or you're out kind of faith. I'm very much well, you know, you're there. You're there. You might feel far away, but you're there and you're seen and you're loved, and there's still light, and your seed might not have germinated just yet, but there's always time. There's always time, and I don't think that we're bound by the time that we have in this life. I think that it's bigger than that. And I'm sure that the term for it is universalism, and that can be used negatively. And I've already talked about labels and them not being very helpful, so I wouldn't class myself as that. But it maybe comes the closest to describing it. But this belief that every single one of us has value, has the ability to give life, to breathe life, to share love with one another, and that is the true key to life, to living. And that we see that in people who don't profess to have a faith. We see that in people who profess to have other faiths. We see that in people who we believe are evil, you know, and you see compassion or kindness or goodness or gentleness or things that certainly in the Bible are professed to be the fruit of the Spirit. The sort of love of God looks like this, and when we see it in people, that's it. That's and it's there all the time, isn't it? And it's throughout everybody. We don't hear about it because it's subtle, it's quiet. You never see trees on the news unless they're on fire. You never see like a news story about there being growth or anything like that. And that's okay. You know, it doesn't mean it's not happening. It's still there. And certainly, I'm looking out my window at the moment, and there's a bridge, and it's covered in ivy, and just this sense of this man-made structure that is being reclaimed, and that you can't stop it. It is relentless and it is inevitable, and there is a hope to that, because it means that no matter what, no matter where you think you are, or somebody else thinks you are, or you think somebody else is, there's hope for everyone, and there's hope for us all, because that growth, that life is in every single one of us, and it will keep going no matter what, no matter how much we try and concrete a space. Grass comes up, it breaks up, it's not permanent, but the growth is. So yeah, I think that's where I'm at.
That's so beautiful, James, and so full of hope. Yeah, that quiet, hidden, relentless life that everyone has. Yeah, such a beautiful place to come to in all of your story. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for asking me. It's been a bit of a roller coaster for me emotionally today. So I appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for sharing, James. And yeah, I hope those that have listened have found it really helpful. And I'm sure even in the difference, I think we can see see where our lives are shared, or where they are different, and that helps us and nourishes us. So thank you for being so open.
Thank you, Tom.
So yeah, that's us for this week. In future weeks, we'll be interviewing others. Hopefully, do get in touch if you would, if you'd really like to be interviewed. And I hope this gives a bit of a flavour for what it will be like, and for us, where we're coming from, as much as anything. So hopefully, it feels a really safe place for those who want to share their story, that they can. And we're really interested in that, because, like I said, I think that's where we gain our own life and our own access, by hearing other stories and seeing where we share the faith or the spirituality, the humanity that we share together. as much as in all the differences as well.
Mm.
So do get in touch, and take care until next time.
Thank you very much.
Bye for now.